For decades, people believed America's greatest strength wasn't just its military or its powerful corporations. It was something far more silent, far more invisible, yet far more powerful than any weapon on earth. It was the US dollar. The currency every nation used, every bank depended on, and every government trusted. But today, that trust is cracking. Slowly, quietly, and now very publicly. Because right now, the United States is facing the one challenge it hoped would never become real: a direct economic confrontation with China. Not a trade dispute, not political drama, but a full-scale financial war that has already started reshaping the world, even if most people haven't noticed it yet. You're about to understand why economists, investors, and governments are suddenly whispering the same question. Is the dollar's era finally coming to an end? Over the last few months, China has been taking steps that are far more aggressive than anything it has ever done before. Moves that directly attack the pillars of American financial dominance. Moves that challenge a system that has existed for nearly 80 years. And the scary part? Many of these actions are working. But before we talk about what's happening right now, we need to understand how the dollar became so powerful in the first place. Because none of this makes sense until you realize what the US actually controls and what China is now trying to take. For decades after World War II, the world relied on the US because America had the biggest economy, the strongest military, and the most stable financial system. Countries needed dollars to trade. They needed dollars to buy oil. They needed dollars to borrow money. Even nations that disliked the US had no choice but to use the American currency. That's how deep the system was. But China watched this quietly, patiently. And while the world was focused on wars, elections, pandemics, and politics, China was building its own power, brick by brick, deal by deal, loan by loan. And now China is finally making its move. It started with something subtle. Countries suddenly announcing deals without using the US dollar. Brazil, Russia, Saudi Arabia, even European nations began talking about alternatives. At first, people thought it was symbolic, just political talk, nothing serious. But then China did something that shocked even US officials. It convinced multiple nations to settle major energy and trade deals directly in Chinese yuan. For the first time in modern history, huge global transactions were happening without a single American dollar involved. And that was the moment Washington realized this wasn't noise. This was strategy. China wasn't just trying to weaken the dollar. It was building a parallel system, an economic world where America didn't dominate. And just as the US started responding, the war escalated. Sanctions, tariffs, chip bans, technology restrictions, investment controls, both sides tightening their grip, both sides trying to outmaneuver each other, and the world watching closely, because whichever country wins this war will shape the future of global power. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one in America wants to admit. China has prepared for this moment for more than 20 years. They studied the US system, learned from it, copied it, and then slowly started building their own version, their own financial networks, their own trade routes, their own alliances, their own currency strategy. Think about this. More than 100 countries have now joined or partnered with China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's not just trade, that's influence, that's loyalty, that's leverage. And at the same time, China has been dumping US debt. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, consistently, month after month. For years, China was the biggest foreign holder of US Treasury bonds. Not anymore. They've reduced their holdings to the lowest level in more than a decade. And they're still selling. Why does that matter? Because the US runs on debt. Its economy, its government spending, its military budget, it all depends on buyers who trust the dollar. So when a major power like China starts backing away, it sends a message to the entire world. Maybe the dollar isn't as invincible as we thought. Now imagine this happening at the same time China is pushing other countries to trade in yuan. Suddenly the US is being hit from two sides, less support for its currency and more competition from China's. But this story gets deeper. Behind the scenes, China is also using gold as a weapon. In the last few years, China has become one of the largest buyers of gold on the planet, quietly stacking, storing, and securing massive reserves. Why? Because gold gives currency stability, and stability gives confidence, and confidence makes other countries trust you more. People don't realize this, but several nations now hold more yuan and gold in their reserves than ever before. And that shift is exactly what China wants. Because the more the world holds yuan, the less they depend on dollars. And the US knows this. That's why America has been tightening restrictions, sanctioning Chinese companies, limiting investments, and trying to choke China's tech development. The US believes controlling technology, especially microchips, is the key to keeping China from becoming too powerful. And in many ways, that's true. The chip war is not just about electronics. It's about economic control. But here's the twist. China isn't backing down. They're building their own chips, creating alliances with countries that the US has less influence over, and investing billions into becoming technologically independent. Right now, people are calling this the silent Cold War. No open battles, no armies marching. But the impact is just as serious, because this war affects everyone. The price of goods, the stability of currencies, the strength of economies, even the future of global leadership. And as this war intensifies, the world is starting to split into two sides. Some nations leaning toward the US, others moving closer to China, and a growing number trying to stay neutral but slowly being pulled into one camp or the other. But here's the real question. What happens if China actually succeeds? What happens if countries really start moving away from the dollar? What happens if the world no longer sees the US currency as the safest option? Because that's the nightmare scenario for America. And it's not impossible. It's already happening in small steps, step by step, deal by deal, shift by shift. And now the US is scrambling to respond. The economic war is no longer something economists talk about behind closed doors. It's out in the open, visible, escalating, and entering a phase where neither side can afford to lose. And as all of this unfolds, one truth is becoming clearer every day. One truth is becoming clearer every day. This isn't just a battle for money. It's a battle for control. Control of markets, control of resources, control of global influence, because whoever controls the financial system controls the world. And both the US and China know it. Right now, you are watching history unfold in real time. We are living through a moment future generations will study in textbooks. A moment where the balance of global power is shifting inch by inch. A moment where two superpowers are slowly tightening their grip, waiting for the other to blink, waiting for the other to make a mistake. But the scary part is this. Both sides believe they're running out of time. The US thinks China is growing too fast, too influential, too bold. And if Washington doesn't act now, it might be too late to stop China from becoming the world's next dominant power. China, on the other hand, believes the US is trying to suppress its rise, cut its growth, limit its power. And if China doesn't push back now, it might never get the chance again. This is why every month something new erupts. A new sanction, a new restriction, a new diplomatic clash, a new warning, a new alliance, a new announcement that surprises the entire world. Just think about the shift happening right now. Countries that used to stay silent are suddenly taking sides. Nations that relied entirely on the US are now signing deals with China. And countries that once followed America without question are now exploring alternatives. Why? Because the world is changing, and both the US and China know that whoever leads the next global economy won't just be a superpower, they'll be the superpower. But to understand where this war is going, you have to understand the pressure building inside both nations. In the USS, inflation, debt, political division, and slowing growth have created a sense of vulnerability. For the first time in decades, Americans are openly questioning their own economic future, and that uncertainty gives China an opening. Meanwhile, China has its own problems: a population crisis, a real estate collapse, slowing manufacturing, falling foreign investment. If China wants to dominate, it needs new allies, new markets, new influence, and it needs them fast. That urgency is why China is making bold moves that it avoided in the past. In other words, both sides feel cornered. And when two global giants feel cornered at the same time, the risk of escalation explodes. That's why economists call this the most dangerous economic moment since the Cold War. But the real turning point, the moment that shocked everyone, came when China convinced major oil suppliers to settle transactions in yuan. This wasn't just an economic move. It was symbolic. It told the world, you don't have to use the dollar anymore. And some countries listened. If energy can be bought in yuan, it means the dollar loses one of its biggest advantages. And if more countries follow, the entire financial structure built by the US starts to weaken. This is why Washington is nervous. This is why the US is imposing tighter restrictions on Chinese investments. This is why American officials warn about economic coercion, because they know the stakes. They know this is not about competition. This is about survival. And as this war intensifies, smaller nations are caught in the middle. Countries in Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Latin America are being pulled like a rope in a global tug of war. Whoever they choose will determine their future and possibly the future of the entire world economy. But here's the twist most people don't see. This war isn't just happening between governments. It's happening in the private sector, in corporations, in banks, in technology companies, in energy markets, in supply chains. When the US banned advanced chips from being sold to China, it wasn't just a tech restriction, it was an economic missile, a direct hit aimed at slowing China's long-term development. Without advanced chips, China can't dominate artificial intelligence. It can't lead in supercomputing. It can't challenge the US in military technology. And China knows this. That's why they responded with their own restrictions: rare earth metals, technology access, critical minerals. China controls resources the world needs, and it's using them as leverage. This war isn't fought with bombs and rockets. It's fought with trade barriers, financial threats, currency manipulation, supply chain control, and global alliances. And the most dangerous part? The world is now so interconnected that if one side falls, everyone feels the shock. If China slows down, global manufacturing collapses. If the US dollar weakens, global markets panic. If trade freezes, economies everywhere suffer. If tensions escalate too far, the world enters a recession. That's how deeply linked everything is now. But even with all this risk, neither side is backing down, because both believe the prize is worth it. For China, the prize is becoming the world's dominant power, replacing the US at the top. For the US, the prize is preserving its leadership and preventing a world where China writes the rules. And as we move deeper into this conflict, something else is becoming clear. This is not just about currency, not just about trade, not just about chips. It's about two completely different visions for how the world should work. One side wants a world led by open markets, democracy, and Western institutions. The other wants a world shaped by state control, central planning, and new alliances that challenge the old order. And the more these visions clash, the more intense the economic war becomes. Every diplomatic meeting, every policy change, every trade deal, it's all part of a much bigger strategy. And make no mistake, the world is moving toward a moment where something big will break. A moment where one wrong move could shift global power in an instant. A moment where one wrong move could shift global power in an instant. And the truth is, both sides know this. That's why every message, every announcement, every action is calculated with extreme precision. Because in this kind of war, even a small mistake can turn into a global earthquake. Right now, the US is trying to protect its dominance by strengthening old alliances. NATO, the EU, Japan, South Korea, Australia, America is pulling everyone closer, reminding them that the dollar is still the safest currency and the US is still the strongest economy. These alliances are America's shield. They represent decades of trust, history, and cooperation. Without them, the US would be far more vulnerable. But China has its own strategy, building new alliances where the US has less influence. Through Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and South America, China is offering what many nations want: loans, infrastructure, trade deals, and political support without asking uncomfortable questions. While the US focuses on defending the old system, China is building a new one. And this new system is growing faster than most analysts expected. Just look at how many countries now trade more with China than with the US. Look at how many nations have joined China's digital payment platforms. Look at how nations are adopting Chinese technology, from 5G networks to smart city systems. Every one of these shifts gives China more leverage and more influence. And influence is a form of power. Meanwhile, within the US, a debate is growing. Some experts argue that America must isolate China even more, cut trade, restrict investments, and push allies to do the same. They believe China is becoming too strong, and if the US doesn't act aggressively, it will lose its position. But others warn that isolating China could backfire. They argue that if the US blocks China from the existing system, China will simply accelerate building a separate global system. And once that separate system becomes strong enough, the world could split permanently into two competing economic blocs, something we haven't seen since the Cold War. And if that happens, the consequences would be enormous. Prices would rise, supply chains would break, economies would shrink, nations would be forced to choose sides. Global travel, trade, technology, everything would be affected. This is why so many world leaders are anxious, because the US and China are not just competing, they're pulling the rest of the world into their conflict. But beneath all the public announcements and political speeches, there's a deeper fear growing in Washington and Beijing, a fear that neither side wants to admit. The US fears losing its global financial dominance, the foundation of its power. China fears rising too fast and triggering a collapse, a scenario that could destroy its economy and cause internal instability. Both countries are powerful, but both are vulnerable. And that's the part most people don't see. Behind China's confidence is a population crisis, a shrinking workforce, and a real estate meltdown so large that analysts call it China's 2008 moment. Behind America's confidence is historic debt, political division, a weakening manufacturing base, and rising global skepticism about the dollar. This is what makes the economic war so dangerous. Both sides are strong, and both sides are fragile. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What happens next? Economists see three possible outcomes, and only one of them is peaceful. The first outcome is escalation. The US and China become more aggressive, more confrontational, and more willing to take risks. Chip restrictions tighten, trade war intensifies, financial sanctions expand. Both sides push until something breaks, a market crashes, a currency collapses, or a major company falls. This would lead to global recession, political instability, and possibly the start of a Cold War II. The second outcome is a global split. The world divides into two systems, a US-led financial system and a China-led financial system. Countries choose sides. Trade and technology become limited. Each bloc develops separately. This would fundamentally reshape the world economy for decades. The third outcome, the peaceful one, is incredibly rare. Both countries agree to cooperate, manage their competition, and avoid crossing red lines. But right now, that outcome seems unlikely. Too much pride, too much ambition, too much distrust. And that brings us to the final point. Who is actually winning right now? Believe it or not, neither side. Both are scoring victories and suffering losses. China is gaining influence through trade, yuan adoption, and infrastructure projects. but its internal economic problems limit how fast it can grow. The US still has the world's most trusted currency, strongest tech companies, and most powerful alliances. But its political instability and debt weaken its long-term strength. It's like watching two giants fight while standing on thin ice. Every step is dangerous. Every move carries risk. Every mistake could cause the ice to crack beneath them. But here's what makes this moment truly historic. For the first time in decades, the world can see the US losing ground. And for the first time ever, the world can see China rising with enough power to challenge the American-led system. This isn't a small rivalry. It's not temporary. It's not political drama. This is a generational power shift. A shift that could reshape the world order. And the biggest question, the one nobody can answer yet, is simple. Will the US protect its dominance, or will China rise enough to change the rules of the global economy forever? Because if the dollar loses its throne, everything changes. Because if the dollar loses its throne, everything changes. Right now, the moves that were meant to secure America's dominance are starting to show cracks, and the people behind these strategies are struggling to explain what's happening behind the scenes. Today, we're looking at a story that seemed powerful on the surface, but the deeper you dig, the more hidden pressures you uncover. In this video, you will see how America's efforts to contain China are creating unintended consequences, why certain tech giants are suddenly under pressure even as markets appear stable, and how global supply chains are quietly showing stress that most people never notice. You'll see how these pieces connect to form a much larger story, one that doesn't make headlines, but is shaping the future of the global economy. This isn't just about trade. It isn't just about technology. It's about a ripple effect that starts with bold policy moves, spreads into markets, affects millions of workers, and ultimately shapes the wealth and security of ordinary people. We break it down step by step with simple words and clear explanations so you can follow exactly what's happening, who is being affected, and what could happen next. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the US strategy to contain China has costs that are spreading faster than expected, why the stability of tech companies, jobs, and global supply chains is more fragile than anyone is admitting, and why the next few months could bring surprises that even the experts are warning about. If you want the full picture behind the headlines, stay until the end. We'll connect the dots on hidden economic pressures, technology risks, and policy decisions that insiders are watching closely. By the end, you'll be able to see the pattern linking these events and understand why the next chapter in the US-China conflict could redefine the global economy. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think will happen next? Will tensions escalate further, or will both sides pull back? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more clear, in-depth analysis on the biggest economic stories shaping our world today.